Paralysis is a short poetic film that is a spoken word piece, and the bystanders are witnesses witnessing a young Black man fight for his life. So the poem of the film is actually the internal thoughts of the bystanders, and they're pretty much internalizing the actions in front of them and thinking about what they would want to do in this predicament, but are paralyzed at the thought of what may happen to them if they do choose to interrupt that encounter between the young Black man and the police officer.
So why did you choose to tell the story?
Because we've always seen these type of stories from the police officer's point of view. So, for example, the short series We Own This City from HBO that just released last year. Great series, by the way, but it was from the perspective of the police officers, and they were essentially the stars of that film or of that production. And we rarely ever get to hear from the people in the community. And I noticed after the whole George Floyd situation and even Freddie Gray, I was out there in Sandtown and was interacting with the community and just hearing what people had to say. But once the news media and the broadcast people, came with all their cameras and kind of exploited that whole situation, it was no longer about the community. It was all about people just trying to exploit a young Black man losing his life at the hands of other police officers. And then I noticed once that news cycle dies down, we never get to hear from that community ever again. They're just traumatized by the event, and they had to live in those conditions that were already, pretty bad before the incident even happened. So just one thing that I noticed, it was like these people in the media are really just taking advantage of this police system that's already broke, and they're not really pouring back into the communities after the damage has been done.
And so you just kind of talk us through like your process in creating this film and such.
Sure. So going back to the George Floyd situation, I was having a lot of conversations just in my community with friends and family, or even just seeing people online on social media talking about what they would do in that situation. Like, if I was there, I would have tackled the cop, I would have stomped the cop, I would have shot the cop, saying a whole lot of stuff. And I was like, you probably wouldn't have done any of that, right? Because it's not realistic, and nobody's really expecting to walk outside in their community and see somebody being brutalized and essentially losing their life at the hands of somebody who's supposed to protect and serve them, right? So just witnessing that alone is already traumatic and will probably, catch you off guard, like immediately. But then I started to think about, who would be somebody who would act in that situation, right? And without giving out any spoilers of the film, I thought of this character who does witness his brother in the situation, in this altercation with the police officer. And in that moment, he's thinking, I need to do something to help, right? And it made me think about the younger generation and how each generation of Black and brown people become a little bit more fearless when it comes to fighting for civil rights and social justice issues. And our question is, white America really ready for that generation that fights and speaks up for themselves by any means necessary? So it's kind of like just foreshadowing what may come in the future if the problem isn't resolved right now.
Well, what's your
I think they're gonna get a full experience, right? Not only is it a film screening, but the poets in the film are also going to be doing some spoken word poetry. So you get live poetry performances, and then we transition into the film, and then we have a Q&A afterwards. So I think it's going to be a full-blown overall experience that's going to, really provoke a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions. The film is a conversation starter, right? It's not argumentative, it's not political, but what it does do is spark conversations. And I believe that it's actually therapeutic to actually talk about your trauma, because I feel like that's the first step to get some sense of healing, right? Also, during the process of making this film, I was going to therapy myself. And, in the Black community, therapy is very taboo, right? Mental health, very taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it because nobody wants to get labeled as crazy. And as Black and brown people in this country, we probably have the most trauma out of any demographic, right? But our feelings aren't regarded. Our feelings aren't heard. Our voices aren't heard, not even with our own community. So in this piece, you'll be seeing and hearing the thoughts of the characters in the film as they're witnessing the events. And I'm hoping that will spark others or lead others to talk about their feelings. You know, these communities that have been impacted by these issues, whether it's police brutality, redlining, discrimination, housing discrimination, bank discrimination, I'm hoping that it starts leading to conversations where people actually open up and talk about it. Because like I said, that is what starts the sense of any type of healing, is talking about the problem.
You before this all of art, can you talk about how you got to know those characters, how they play a role?
Right. So each character in the film, well, for each poet in the film, I gave him a character profile. Right. So my great friend Akila Divine, great poet, great artist, singer, rapper. Her character is a single Black woman who's, you know, just doing the best to provide for her son. But as she's walking down the street, she witnesses this altercation. And in that moment, she's thinking about how that could be her son, or one day it could be her son. And if she's thinking about, you know, as a mother, she's not able to protect her child from the person who's supposed to protect them, right? So she's going through this, you know, very conflicted mental space of, wow, my son is not considered human in a sense, right? The very people that we pay taxes to protect and serve us and you know, patrol our communities are the same ones that are inflicting violence on us, right? Keyshawn, who's played by Ephraim Nehemiah, he's watching it from a perspective of somebody who's in his peer group, and he's thinking, oh, that could very well be me. You know, the tables could be turned, and I could be on the pavement. He could be watching me suffer. He wants to do something, but he knows if he gets involved, now he's putting his life in jeopardy. Mr. Willie, who's played by Analysis, he is like the OG in the neighborhood, right? He owns the corner store, you know, he's watched like a pillar in the community. Because as we know, in cities like Baltimore and a lot of other cities in America, they suffer from food deserts, right? So the corner store is like, that's your pharmacy, that's your grocery store, that's your, you know, your 7-Eleven, everything, right? But it's hard for people to get fresh produce from a corner store. So like somebody like Mr. Willie plays a big part in those communities. But his perspective is, you know, he's older, so he's witnessed this play out time and time again. When he was coming up in his parents' generation, and now he's witnessing a young man who he watched grow up in the neighborhood, and now he's about to lose his life to the very thing that he's witnessed throughout his whole life. And he's thinking like, man, how much more can we bear of this? How much more do I have to witness this? You know, after all these years, I still haven't done anything, you know? So that's his whole perspective. And then Dwayne, who's played by Black Chakra, who's the main character in the film, he's the young man who's actually being brutalized by the police. And he's thinking about, you know, his life is flashing before his eyes. And he's thinking about all the good that he's done in the world, and then how he still ended up in this predicament. He's also thinking about how all these people in the community know who he is, but in this moment, they're treating him like a stranger and not trying to, you know, interject in what's going on. Nobody's really helping, trying to save him. It's just, you know, all screaming and shouting and yelling and that type of protest, but no real action. So that's what he's going through in that moment.
These are one of the characters, a lot of the characters they were talking about in our
Exactly.
So if you could talk to a Black brother or a Black sister, you introduce them with
right.
What would encourage you to to them about this being Black in art?
That's a deep one. That's a loaded question. So first things first with the film, I think number one, I would tell them, like, you know, this is not your typical Hollywood cinematic type of film. This is very much so an artistic, poetic film that really is kind of introspective. It's going to cause you to think. It's going to cause you to reflect. Like I said previously, it's going to spark conversation. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of, I think it's going to help build community. You know, so I would encourage people to come out if they want to witness something that's going to provoke certain emotions that they may have had buried, you know, over the years of not really expressing certain feelings or emotions that they've had. And I think when you're able to make that connection with somebody else in your community, it just overall, I think it helps heal the community, right? So yeah, it's just going to be an experience, you know, from start to finish. And then, yeah, that's what I would say. Oh, no, you said something about being Black. So I tell my students all the time, like, even though this film is dealing with, trauma and whatnot, I always tell them that you are not your trauma, right? You are not defined by the things that happen to you. You are defined by how you respond, right? So being Black is great because no matter how many times people try to discriminate against us, try to stagnate us, try to kill us, our spirit continues to live on. And I think that's why we're hated the most, because we're so resilient and you can't kill spirit. You can kill bodies, but the spirit is going to live forever.
That's really, because I was saying there's when we should expect to see this film, where we can go.
Yes. So March 28th, Morgan State University, at the Jenkins Hall, I believe it is. Jenkins Hall, room 100. That's the auditorium we're going to be in. 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock is the event. It's already sold out, but we have 20 seats reserved for Morgan State students. So if you're listening to this or you're watching this, make sure you come out because we want to make sure that we have some representation from the student body there as well. So yeah, that's where you can see it next. But we're also working on some other screenings. We probably have 2 more screenings, and then we'll go into the film festival circuit.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.